everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Breakdowns and Breakaways podcast. I am Eddie Provident. I'm going to be your co-host on this journey through the hockey season. With me is the man, the myth, the legend himself, Danny Shirey. Danny has put together a Substack called Breakdowns and Breakaways, and this is going to be the video and audio portion of that experiment. And really, I'm excited to be here with you, man. This is your baby. I'm just going to be, hopefully just coasting this thing along. But with it being your thing, and this is your new endeavor, why don't you tell everybody what they can expect and what to listen for and watch for throughout the hockey season?
Yeah, well, first off, I'm really thrilled to have you be a part of this journey with me. I mean,
you're in a small minority.
We've been talking about doing something like this for a while.
It's been a year.
That we probably had monthly check-ins where we were like, hey, like what are we going to name this thing, and when are we going to start doing it? And
I still say my favorite name idea was the Puck Talks Here, but Danny didn't like that one too much, so I mean, it was bad. The naming was rough.
Well, we also could have gone with the Two Stooges, which would have been pretty fitting. But
I think Marissa and Maddie would agree with that one. But
yeah, no doubt. But anyway, Breakdowns and Breakaways, for lack of a better term, my baby here is in the hockey media space right now, and in general hockey coverage. One of the things I think that's really lacking still, even with all the information and stats and the accessibility to video, I think there's still a lot of room for growth as far as teaching people about the sport and how they can understand the technicalities of the sport, the kind of fundamentals. God, I hope I can speak a little bit better than that if we're starting a podcast. But beyond that, kind of tying all that into, you go on Twitter all the time and a trade happens. You see all these different analytical data cards, whether it's JFresh, Hockey Viz, or the like evolving hockey RAPM charts. You see all that kind of stuff, and it's really easy to be like, oh, well, this dude has like a 90th percentile.
His box is red. He's good.
Yeah,
his box is blue. He's
exactly.
bad.
And while I love all of that information, and it does have validity and it does have importance, I think it's kind of setting us down a path that lacks nuance, which is the exact opposite of what that stuff is intended to do. So essentially, Breakdowns and Breakaways for me, I want to be, and with you, of course, on this podcast, I want to be your go-to source when it comes to analyzing the Penguins, whether that means breaking down a player's game and what he's good at, what he needs to improve on, why he's struggling, why he's playing well. If a trade goes down, analyzing the inner workings of that and how it might impact the team on a greater or larger scale. Basically, I want you, when something happens, to be like, I want to know what Danny and Eddie think about this, because I trust them and their knowledge on the situation.
And I think another thing, and I see this, I bring up my dad a lot with hockey because that's where I got my love of the game. But I see this a lot with him and guys like him, where hockey has changed so much that 5-10 years ago, you may have known a lot about hockey. You may have been an expert in the game of hockey, but because it's changed so much and analytics have become so much more accepted and just a part of the everyday culture of hockey, that even if you consider yourself like, yeah, I'm one of those hardcore hockey fans, it doesn't hurt to have that refresher. I know I'm in that boat a lot of times where, I see all of these numbers and all of these letters and everything, and it's like, what in the world are they talking about here? So I think that, having this space where it's not frowned upon to ask questions, it's not frowned upon to not know, and then to have someone like you who can say, hey, this is what this means. This is how this affects hockey. And it doesn't mean that we don't watch the game and say, oh, this person's a good or bad player, and we just focus on fancy stats, but it's how do these stats tell a story that maybe we can't see on TV or we can't see when we go to the arena. And I think that that's important for anybody that's into any sport, really, to have that underlying understanding.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I, like, personally, whenever I'm going to analyze something, especially if I'm going to write about it, I typically start with the data, because that's as concrete as you can get from the outset, right? So you look and I don't know, there's a million examples I could pick here, but let's just say, here's a good example. Riley Smith winger the Penguins acquired the day before actually it was the day the NHL draft started this summer. Yep. Kyle Dubas, Mike Sullivan both talk about Riley Smith in a light that makes him sound like he is maybe not an elite defensive winger, but a guy who's really going to help them in the defensive end.
Yeah, that's what he brings.
But then you go and look at some of the data we have that is looking to adjust and account for a player's individual impact on the defensive end. Well, Riley Smith hasn't graded out all that great, at least in terms of even strength defensive impacts over the past several years. Okay, well, that's a starting point for me. Why are Dubas and Sullivan saying that he's strong in his own end, and why are the numbers saying something else? Well, there's a couple of avenues you can go from there, but once you see that data point that says, he might not be as great as in his own end, that's where you can go and start looking for those things, because maybe something I think a lot of people lose sight of is that these outputs are not necessarily measuring what you think. So when I talk about even strength defensive impacts, right? What do you think about when you think of defensive play in hockey?
5-on-5 in your own zone.
In your own zone.
In your own zone, what are you doing? Are you winning puck battles? Are you blocking shots? What's your, are you on the ice for goals against? Are you on the ice for goals for? Yeah, that's when I think of defensive metrics. That's what I think myself and probably most hockey fans would think of.
Yeah, I agree. I hear that a lot when you bring that up. Those are all things that people mention, but specifically in the defensive zone, right? Well, and I haven't come to a consensus on this one way or the other, but it's very possible that Riley Smith is very good in the defensive zone, but because of things he's doing in other areas of the ice and other components of the game, it might be causing his team to allow more quality chances against. And what I mean by that is actually the first analysis I wrote for Breakdowns and Breakaways was taking a look at some of the defensive issues the Penguins had last year, but some of those issues were not caused by them posting up in the defensive zone and having leaky coverage. Now, that did happen a lot, but a lot of the time, how whenever the team the opposition crossed their own blue line to get into the neutral zone, carrying the puck up ice against the Penguins, a lot of the time it felt like, oh crap, something bad is going to happen here, even though it might have just been like a typical rush up the ice, right? Well, a lot of the time that was happening because of the disconnects between the forwards and the defensemen out on the ice, right? A lot of the time, all three forwards, and, as much as we talked about the roster that was around the core here, the core was a little bit guilty in this component as well, where Sidney Crosby, Jake Gensel, Brian Rust are maybe looking to get an extra goal late, and they're not being as conscientious about their positioning in the O zone.
Interesting.
And all three of them get caught below the puck, and immediately upon a change of possession, team has numbers going the other way.
That's the kind of thing I love about hockey, and I think that's why I'm drawn to hockey as much as I am, because like with football, right? Like let's take football as an example. The only time offense really directly affects the defense is when there is a turnover or when the offense is eating up clock, right? Most other times, the offense doesn't really directly affect defense. In baseball, offense never directly affects defense. But in hockey, and I would say in basketball, because they're transition games, soccer, your offense and where you're at positionally directly affects what happens 5 seconds later on the defensive side of the ice or on the defensive side of the playing field. And I think that it's almost like a flow and a give and take that I enjoy about hockey so much.
It's all about
it's
sequencing.
all interconnected.
It's all about sequencing. So, even kind of tying back into the example I was just talking about, in a lot of those instances, all of a sudden you'd see P.O. Joseph trying to defend a 2-on-1 or a 3-on-1 against. He might not make the best play there, and you're like, oh, come on. Like, yeah, it was an odd man rush.
Why was he in that situation?
Why was he in that position to begin with? And it's pretty easy to lose sight of that because as humans, and especially sports fans, we're always looking to assign blame or figure out the why. Why did that goal get scored? Why was that guy right there? But it's about going an extra step there and looking at the sequence of events that happen, right? Because there's so many little micro actions that happen all over the ice. Like you were talking about puck battles in the corner. How often do we hear, even today, national analysts talking about how important faceoffs are, or you get the AWS faceoff probability percentage? well, why are we not doing that for the hundreds of puck battles that happen all over the ice in the game? So it's just about a different way of looking at the game and trying to be as comprehensive as possible to get actual answers rather than trying to push a narrative or whatever else it might be.
I had a conversation a couple years ago with Sean Tierney, and I asked him, as an analytics guru, what is the most overrated stat in your mind? Thinking 100% he was going to say plus minus, because that is the that's been the battle the last couple of years. And he says face-offs won, face-off percentage. And it floored me. I was like, I fully wasn't expecting that. And I said, all right, you got to explain that a little bit more. And he said, it's just a glorified puck battle. That's all it is. We don't put any more weight on any other puck battle. We just happen to put weight on this puck battle because it starts the play.
Well, and it's easier to quantify too.
Sure.
What do you quantify as a lost puck battle? Well, there's a lot of times where your two guys might be going into battle in the corner and neither of them come out with the puck, right? So that's a lot harder to quantify, and it takes more time to really sit there and think about rather than being like, oh, well, he lost the face-off and they just got scored against right there. What about the puck battle that was lost and dude swiped the puck off the corner and raced in and scored? That goal against counts the same.
All right, man, so let's switch gears. So obviously we're in Pittsburgh. You grew up a Penguins fan. I grew up a Penguins fan. This is going to be a predominantly Penguins podcast. So everyone wants to talk about Erik Karlsson. Everybody wants to talk about the big trade. Kyle Dubas coming in, making all these changes. But with all those changes, Erik Karlsson wasn't the only addition to this Penguins group. So what can people expect from you and this show, you being your Substack, what you're writing, about what can we expect as far as the Penguins this season? Give me the Danny Shirey flyover of the flightless birds.
Well, right off rip, I got to say Erik Karlsson acquisition is phenomenal, great.
How he pulled it off the way he did, man.
I was going to get into that. So if you look at the Penguins situation and where they're at, almost every scenario in which you have an aging core, it makes sense to start building for the future and kind of taking a step back. If something good happens from it, great. But if not, we've got our eyes set on phasing this generation out and right, leading into the next. Well, when you have three franchise legends who've spent their entire careers together, and Crosby, Malkin, and Letang, that calls for a different course of action, especially with the way that they're still playing. So I love the fact that they went out and got Karlsson, not because he was the Norris Trophy winning defenseman last year, but because he was legitimately the best player available on the market to help augment this core right here and now. With that being said, by no means does that put the Penguins in the conversation for Stanley Cup contenders right now. I still think that, there's some pieces there. You look at the top six right now, the top six is probably going to be very, very good again, like they were last year. I think Riley Smith going from Jason Zucker to Riley Smith is overall more of a lateral move, but I think Smith might be able to help specifically Evgeny Malkin in some areas that Zucker maybe was a little bit insufficient, specifically in transition. Riley Smith's a really good transition player.
And not to go against what you said about his defensive play, but I do think he's probably a more well-rounded player on both sides of the ice.
Well, and that's the thing too. So we could sit here and talk for hours and hours about the complexities of it, but that's the other thing, going back to Smith's defensive impact, is that he very well could be very, very good in the defensive zone, and that might in turn help the Malkin line, especially we know Malkin's not the greatest defensive player in the world. I also think some of his defensive issues are often overblown. But with that being said, I think as a whole, you can expect greatness from the top six. The question is, are Crosby and Malkin going to stay completely healthy again? I think that's a major, major ask to even expect both of them to play 75 plus games. I mean, last year we weren't even really sure if Malkin had 3/4 of a season out.
I think another question on that is, even should they, if they are completely healthy full season, do you give them some?
You could have made the argument this past season that they could have used some rest down the stretch, but they literally couldn't because they had to win those games.
Right.
So I'm not putting the Penguins in the cup contender category yet. I I think they're a lot better than they were last year. There's no question about that. And the biggest reason is they got rid of I don't like using the term dead weight because they are NHL players, they're professional athletes, but they got rid of a lot of the pieces that weren't exactly fitting with the rest of the group, right?
That were eating up a lot of space.
Yeah. I think Jeff Petrie played quite a bit better last season than people gave him credit for. Now we could go down the rabbit hole of, was he living up to his cap hit? Did the trade make sense to do? But regardless, they moved on from Jeff Petrie to the guy who just won the Norris. That in and of itself is huge.
And people forget this with Erik Karlsson, but they got younger in that too. Like
they did.
Karlsson is actually younger than Jeff Petrie. He's younger than all three of the core three. I think that, and this is something that I think Karlsson has had a bad rap over the last 4 or 5 years of his career, rightfully so. But everyone wonders, will the ankle hold up? Is he going to be injury prone? He's an older defenseman. Well, the fact of the matter is he's in his early 30s, tail end of his early 30s, but he's still in his early 30s, Danny, and he doesn't play a game that is going to put a ton of wear and tear and ground and pound.
He's playing that body. Finesse game, baby.
So he's one of those guys that might be able to finish this contract out, maybe not at a Norris Trophy 100-point level, but at still a very high level that will help this team even after the next 2 years.
Right. And honestly, regardless of Karlsson's point production, I don't think anybody should be expecting another 100-point season.
I don't think that's realistic, yeah.
But regardless of whether he's putting up 100 points or 55 points, I think it's more about how he's going to help the Penguins in areas that they were deficient last year. Not to keep belaboring Petrie, but last year, a lot of the issues we saw with Jeff Petrie is, well, he was still capable of making a pretty good first pass out of his zone, and he was decent in the offensive zone at various stretches. I think that was kind of wishy-washy as he dealt with injuries and was in and out of the lineup a little bit. But a lot of the time when you saw Petrie getting into trouble, it was because he was taking too long to make decisions on the breakout, whether that was behind his own net or, looking for a pass and decided the lane wasn't there and hung on to the puck. He's not 28 anymore. He's in his mid 30s here. And that extra step, that extra second makes a world of difference in the NHL. So a lot of the time that hesitation caused him to turn the puck over, and all of a sudden it looked like he was a mess in the defensive zone. Karlsson, on the other hand, there might not be a better defenseman in the NHL at evading pressure and making smart, quick, and crisp decisions to get the puck up ice, whether it's via pass or skating it himself. So I think that is going to be a huge, huge boost regardless of whatever points are coming their way.
I think another thing that, I don't think it's been overlooked by the fan base, but I think maybe the national media has overlooked this a little bit, the impact that this is going to have on Chris Letang. I don't, and you would know better than me, but I don't foresee them putting them on the same defensive pair.
No.
So when you have two guys like that who are used to eating minutes, Letang has led the team in minutes year in and year out. And he's had injury issues. He's had 2 strokes. This is a guy that even though he's 36, he's probably got more mileage than the average 36-year-old, even though he takes incredible care of his body. But now having somebody like Erik Karlsson, you don't have to play Chris Letang 30 minutes a game. You can cut his minutes down and keep him fresh and keep him a little bit, ready for the offseason. Or if you get into a situation where you have an injury and your third pairing D is 2 minor league guys, they don't have to see the ice very often because you have a guy like Karlsson and a guy like Letang who can eat up 50 minutes of a game.
Right. So that's a great transition to my next point is that
it's a transition game, man.
You're going to get a lot of that from that guy. Just prepare yourself. But no, Jan Ruda was another guy. I think he's a fine defensive defenseman, okay on a third pairing, but he's a luxury third pairing defensive defenseman at a $2.75 million cap hit.
I agree with that.
Some teams that'll work. The Penguins situation, they don't need that guy. All right. So Ruda's gone. They cleared up that cap space from him. But, I know it's not as sexy of a name or a player, but I was convinced halfway through last season that Chad Ruhwedel could have been providing the exact same overall impacts as Ruda, if not better, at a fraction of the cost. So a lot of people have been saying, well, that third pairing, I'm really worried, like Ruhwedel, he can't be a full-time guy.
He's been fine as a third pairing guy, in my opinion.
He has been. Last season, there were some points in time, and it might have been just because he was in and out of the lineup compared to the previous year where he actually finally locked down the number 6 spot for the full season. Last year, there were points in time where I thought his game could have improved a little bit, but if you look at how the Penguins control play when he's out on the ice, control goals, control chances, control shots, you can't really do much better than what Chad Ruhwedel is providing you. And here's the other thing, right? Like you were just talking about, you've got Carlson and Letang on your first 2 pairings. They're going to be out there for 50 minutes of the game. So then you got to trot Ruhwedel out there for 10 minutes. It's
not that bad.
I promise you Ruhwedel and the Penguins can keep his head above water in those 10 minutes.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, we're talking about the third pair here. We're talking about the 6th defenseman. This isn't the guy that's going to be out on the ice 18 to 20 minutes a game. This is a guy that, like you said, probably going to see the ice 10, maybe a little bit longer than that, depending on, circumstances. But on average, he's probably going to see 10 minutes of ice time a night. He's a veteran that knows the system that you can rely on, that is almost a security blanket for Mike Sullivan to throw out there for those 10 minutes. Is he the best defenseman in the NHL? No. Is he a top 4 kind of guy? No. But he is a guy that can be very just good at what he does.
Yeah, I mean, he just quietly goes about his business. Something I found a little funny recently. I tweeted something out about what the pairings look like as of now going into the season, and people were responding. They're like, "Oh, they can't have that soft, tiny Ruhwedel down there. Like he doesn't. They need Ruda. I don't know why they traded Ruda. He actually hits people." I don't want to speak down on any fans or anything, but when someone says something like that, I genuinely question if they watch the game, because Chad Ruhwedel is not lighting anybody up out there by any means, but that dude is super physical out there. Extremely physical. Like next time, or go on YouTube and watch a Penguins game over the past couple of years, I promise you Chad Ruhwedel is being physical out there. Now, it might not constitute as what you would consider a body check or a crushing blow.
He's not Scott Stevens, but...
Yeah, but again, if you separate what fans love in big hits and why hitting is actually in the game, which is to separate your opponent from the puck and regain
control
of it, that's what Ruhwedel's out there doing. He's not out there trying to light guys up. He's trying to effectively time his hits and contact so that he can separate the opposition from the puck. His partner can swoop in on it, or his center can swing low with the puck. Getting way more granular here on Chad Ruhwedel than I wanted to be. But just in a general sense, we're already starting to see where some of the issues with Petrie and the issues with Ruda there, and how these are already going to be improved upon. And we haven't even started talking about the forward group.
Right. And the thing with this is, and you alluded to this earlier in the conversation, Chad Ruhwedel's cap hit is substantially less than someone like Jan Ruda or somebody else that you may have in that 6th defenseman spot. And if he's only playing 10 minutes, I don't want to pay a guy $3 million a year or $2.5 million a year to play 10 minutes a game. That's not the situation I want to be in. The way the Penguins have constructed their roster, the 6th pair defenseman does not warrant that kind of cap hit. And so, or the 6th defenseman on the defensive core.
Truth be told, most teams aren't constructed that way.
Right. And so in that case, I would rather have a guy like Ruhwedel who is reliable and maybe has a lower ceiling than most, but you know what you're going to get out of him for those 10 minutes a game. Yeah, he's going to make the occasional mistake. He's not perfect. He's but you know what to expect from him. Like you said, we're getting way too granular on Chad Ruhwedel, but this is the kind of conversation that people are gonna that we can expect this season. We may go down rabbit holes where we get into the granular side of things on a certain player or a certain play during a game or a matchup or something like that. And that's what I like about this. We have this free flowing kind of, hey, we have a plan for the episode, but if the conversation goes somewhere else, that's where the conversation goes. I would also encourage, if you're watching on YouTube, throw some comments in the comments section on what you want to hear us talk about, what you want to hear Danny break down, what you want to see from this show. We're starting, this is episode 1, and we talked the other day about how, we don't want to have anyone over us saying this is what you can and can't do. We want to make this our own thing. And, we want to make this the best content for the people that are watching and listening. So if you have ideas, if you want to hear something, like I said, you want to see Danny break something down, drop them in the comments section. Let us know. Go on Danny's Substack, subscribe. That's you've got some tiers. You want to quickly shout that out and talk about that.
Yeah. So basically, the way I truly would love for all my hockey content or my written hockey content to be free and accessible to all, but quite frankly, it's just not
for make a living, man.
Yeah, you got to make a living, and especially for the amount of time and effort that goes into it, you got to get a little bit of something out of it. So with that being said, monthly subscriptions start at $5 a month. That entitles you to a bare bones minimum of at least 3 in-depth Penguins analyses every single week. And that's just for the off season. I'm sure once we get into the season, I'm going to be writing all kinds of different stuff off of games. And, if certain line combinations break out during practice, I might dive into that. So, but that entitles you to a bare bones minimum of 3 in-depth Penguins analyses every week. If you break that down over the course of a month, you're paying less than 40 cents per post, which, to toot my own horn a little bit, I think that's a pretty good deal. And if you want to save a little bit of money, you can also buy an annual subscription. That's $50. Those are the tiers.
Yeah. And on the podcast side, you can subscribe on YouTube. You're already at the channel watching the episode. So subscribe, hit the like button. Like I said, leave a comment. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, leave us a review, all that kind of stuff. All the housekeeping things that, every podcast says at the end of a podcast. But no, we truly do appreciate you coming along for this ride with us. I'm excited to hang out with Danny. He's one of my better friends. And I definitely think he's one of the better hockey minds, not just in Pittsburgh, but I think in all of NHL coverage. I think Danny is an up-and-coming guy for sure. And it's going to be fun to not only host a show with you, but I'll be learning right along with whoever else is watching. So this has been a good time, and I guess we'll see you all next week. You got anything else for anyone, Danny?
No, I'm with you. I'm super excited about what's ahead, and I know we've already touched on it several times, but it was very important to me, especially that we had autonomy here over what we're doing. We're not going to be limited by anybody above us or worried about what other people might think. Our goal here is to put out quality hockey content that you're not going to find anywhere else. Like I don't want to come here and do this with you every week if we're going to be talking and saying the same crap that you go find elsewhere. It'd be a waste of our time, and it'd be a waste of your time. So it's my goal, and I'm sure it's your goal too, that we bring you, that top-notch content that you're looking forward to every single week.
For sure, man. Well, for Danny Shirey, I'm Eddie Provident. This has been the Breakdowns and Breakaways podcast. We will see you next week, same time, same place.